Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to another Supatease video. Apologies on the delay between this one and the previous. The beta was lagging quite heavily every time that I logged on to try and take a look at it. And I'm also partly a lot lazy. But here it is, we're back. We've got the Resto Druid Covenant review. So we went through, if you haven't seen it already, the Balanced Druid and all four Covenant options, what I thought about them. And if you want to see more in detail as to that specialization, please check out those videos. Now I'm going to be doing a series on Resto Druid, what I think about it. Also the flexibility of the Covenant, which Covenant allows you to play multiple specializations, multiple parts of the game as well, because some of them do seem to be more focused at PvP or PvE in that regard. And we'll start this one off with the same way we did the Balanced Druid with Nightfae. So if you haven't seen any of the Covenant information, you're going to be getting a class ability and a Covenant ability when you pick the Covenant. And it's the same abilities for Restoration Druid, but you have to think of the value a little bit differently. As Balance, Convoke the Spirits was quite insane burst damage. Now, as a Restoration Druid, it may be more difficult to utilize aggressively. As I was saying with Balance, you can use Heart of the Wild, Convoke the Spirits, and sort of benefit from its healing effects as well as its damage effects. It's more of a multi-purpose tool. But as Resto Druid, you're likely running Guardian Affinity. Perhaps if it's in a meta where the damage is slower paced and we utilize Feral Affinity, you could see a Feral Affinity Convoke the Spirits all in. So take that into consideration, but we haven't gotten to the point where we know how fast PvP is going to be overall. I think that's also unlikely that we would see, other than potentially in Mythic Plus. Maybe if you do a lot of big trash pulls, group up the mobs, and then the Resto Druids, if they're healing, can contribute quite a bit of damage with Convoke the Spirits and get a big burst window there. Aggressively, it's a bit awkward to use overall, though. Defensively, it's still just a really good burst tool. You're going to pump out a ton of heal over time effects for free, and if you are not interrupted, then great, you get the whole benefit. So playing with two spellcasters or spellcasters in general as a Resto Druid where you're more free, you'll be able to benefit from the effects of it as a heal. But you should take into consideration that it might have potential for damage. In my mind, at the moment, it is the most fun Covenant ability. I know we're in the current year and playing for fun. People just want to play for performance and all that, but I'm honestly trying my best to figure out a way to make it as competitive as possible because I like it the most of all the Covenant spells so far. The other one, which is Covenant specific, the spell that you'll get is Soul Shape, which remains unchanged for Resto compared to Balance. You still just go into a Ghost Wolf, and then you can teleport and you move faster. Now again, the downside of this that I pointed out for Balance is that you already move pretty fast with travel form and shapeshifting, that it seems a bit unnecessary to utilize it in this regard. But do note that in the current Battle for Azeroth meta, Restoration Druids need to drink a lot. And after, if you're into a specific talent tree, which I'll get to, after you've concluded using a Covenant spell, you'll go into Stealth. So if you manage to dispel your damage over time effects, use this to blink away, you can sneak out of combat and drink. So it may have more utilization than that of Balanced Druid that I already went over. I found it to be a bit weak. But for Resto, it could have value if you run the Sylvari Mantle talent, which is in this Forge of Bonds Covenant tree that we're just going to take a look at. So it has some good synergies overall so far with the class and with the Covenant specific abilities. And this is the Sylvari Mantle. It's a part of Nia's tree, and you can choose that, or defeating an enemy reduces the cooldown. Again, you don't really defeat enemies in PvP. You don't really care about Soul Shape so much in PvE because you move so fast as a Druid that I would think you get more benefit from concealing yourself and maybe looking for restells off of that concealment. Conduits are still not available. I'll be doing a conduit review as soon as they are. So we'll move down to the next tier. We still have Nia's Tools Burst, which functions the same way as it would for Balance. So if you wanted to go a little bit of offense, let's say you're playing with a class that doesn't have a slow, you could opt to go for this as well as Restoration, and it will give you a slow. The other one, you do not have interrupts, so yeah, picking this doesn't make sense since it's really only benefiting you when you interrupt a target. So I wouldn't recommend this overall. And then Nia's Tools Herbs. This is kind of the cookie cutter pick. when you heal somebody, you can just give them a little bit of haste. So if you're just going to go for a default build that works in all aspects of the game, I would recommend Nia's Tools Herbs, and you just get some extra haste. Moving down to the next tier, we've got Care Package. This again is more of just like the fun tier, so you just get a little bit of extra resources, or you can get extra movement speed from defeating an enemy. Again, movement speed not a big issue for druids. And then on the final tier, we have the 10% mastery benefit after using your Nightfae class ability. So this is going to be your Convoke the Spirits. So after you cast this ability, you also gain 10% mastery. That gives you massive healing output. So it's really good synergy in this tree for Restoration Druid. By all means, this is a top tier option to pick Nia when you're going through. Now moving down to the Dreamweaver. When we start off, when your soul shape ends, you increase the movement speed of your nearby allies by 15%. Maybe you're about to win a game, you want to push in for the kill, you jump into your soul shape, and you blink on top of your team, you give them a little bit of a sprint. It seems a bit unnecessary due to the fact that Stampeding Roar is already returning and kind of fills that role at a more superior value. It's like a mini Stampeding Roar in that sense. So this is for finishing power, perhaps for running away, but generally you don't want to be next to your teammates in PvP. In PvE, again, it overlaps with Stampede. While Stampede is going to be a great mechanic for speed running through Mythic Plus dungeons, or maybe getting a raid group through a mechanic, like crossing a long bridge, Stampede also always has good synergy. You'll bring in a little bit of extra synergy for those situations as well in this talent tree. Moving down to the next tier, Social Butterfly. When at least 2 allies are within 8 yards, your versatility increases by 5% for 5 seconds. When this expires, 2 nearby allies gain this bonus for 5 seconds before passing it back to you. So in Mythic Plus, this makes a lot of sense. You're just going to be getting versatility because you're going to be standing next to your range group most of the time, unless there's quaking or something on the ground. Raid group, there's going to be a lot of people. So this seems like the raid talent overall. The next one, which it already immediately stands out as like the PvP choice because it has to do with crowd control. So when you root or stun or incapacitate, and you do have incapacitates running Guardian Affinity with Incapacitating Roar, you'll also snare the target by 90%. So if a rogue is running at you, Incapacitating Roar, move away. He's already crowd controlled the target, and then they're immediately slowed coming out of the crowd control. Pretty good benefit for PvP. But something else to take into consideration is Empowered Chrysalis. 10% of your overhealing. Resto Druid is pretty notorious for overhealing. When you put rejuvenations on multiple targets and they haven't been hit yet, you'll start to accumulate a shield up to 15% of your casters, up to your health basically. This is really good overall. I could see this working for PvE and PvP, whereas Social Butterfly is strictly PvE and Soothing Voice would be strictly PvP. Now, the value of this could be absolutely like unparalleled really with this overall, just having a 90% slow. I don't think there's a slow stronger than that in the game. So this is something that I'll have to play out with. So if you're not following me already on my Twitch, twitch.tv/Supatease, I'm doing my best to stream Shadowlands beta play. At the moment it's a little bit difficult to get queue times, but I'm sure that as they open up access and more players get in, and when we get closer to the PvP phase and then the tuning phase, that won't be so much of a problem. And I'll be trying all this stuff out because it's very important that you know what you're picking when it comes to these covenants, because it's going to be, from my understanding, a really big pain in the butt to the point where it's probably not worth it to switch. So you want to go into this with as much information as you can get, which I'm trying to do right here in the video, before you make that decision. Now moving down, so we've got this tier. We've got something that's just, again, for fun. Fairy Dust, you get a little bit of less damage when you fall, but you already generally don't have problems taking fall damage as a druid with this with Wild Charge and Travel Form. And then every 1 hour spent in a rest area grants you increased gold. I'm honestly going for the gold there. I generally don't have problems dying from fall damage. I guess if you did and that saved you more gold on reparables, okay. And then the last tier here is Pod Tender. This is the one where I don't know if it's going to work or not in PvP, because it can only happen every 30 minutes. And generally the rule with PvP is, I believe, 6 minutes. Anything that's 6 minutes or up from that doesn't work in PvP. So things like Lay on Hands, historically Army of the Dead, like these really long cooldowns, generally don't work in PvP. But at the same time, I've been seeing interviews that sounds like they want as many things as possible to work in PvP. So this is effectively a cheat death, right? Whenever you would take damage that would kill you, you instead rejuvenate within a wild seed. So you're like a Nivea from League of Legends. You're gonna go into a little pod, and you're gonna heal up. But if that pod takes 10,000 damage, you're gonna die. So you have 20,000 health at max level. Although who knows with the actual itemization, you probably have a bit more. You surely have more health than this. But at the moment, it's half of my health. They'll have to kill you and then do half of your health. Even if it's a 30-minute cooldown and it works in one arena, and then hopefully resets when you get out of arena, this is amazing. Especially if you're going to be the target. This opens up potentially running feral affinity too, and you can gamble being really aggressive, knowing that you're going to go into the pod tender seed. So if this does work in PvP, it's going to be very strong. I also think it could be very fun because I don't think we've ever seen something like this. I mean, usually when we see cheat death effects or resurrect effects in PvP, the last time I remember was Wrath of Lich King with Death Knights turning you into a ghoul, and it was really broken when it came out and you'd smash people. This seems like there's a lot more gameplay tied into it than that old previous iteration of a similar idea, where the other team can still just dogpile on top of you while you're in the pod, and if your team doesn't help you, then you'll die. Obviously in PvE, cheat deaths are absolutely top tier. So this is a tree that seems solid across the board in the game. I wouldn't think that it's a bad idea to go. This is probably the one I would pick for Restoration Druid overall. Just getting a lot of extra healing, mobility, but I guess only if the cheat death works in PvP. Otherwise, then this is a PvE pick, right? Because you get cheat death effects, you get increased healing, you get raid speed boosts. But if the pod tender does work in PvP, I'm probably going to be going with this one just because I think it could be a lot of fun. The third option is obviously Korayn here. And we've got Horn of the Wild Hunt, which means Soul Shape increases the movement speed of allies within 40 yards by 10%. So 40 yards is a lot bigger radius. And 10% movement speed is still somewhat negligible. But your other option is very difficult to use, which is the Wild Hunt's Charge. While out of combat, your Soul Shape's teleport becomes a charge, stunning your target for 2 seconds and ending your Soul Shape. Now, you have to be out of combat, so it's very similar to the classic Warrior. Anything that hits you, you're in combat. You can't charge the target. You're not going to get that stun. It's only a 2-second stun. Whereas this could benefit your team with Soul Shape, give it some extra usage. So it seems like a pretty easy pick. However, do remember, if conduits end up being the main thing that you go after in these talent trees, you may not have a choice when it comes to this. If a finesse conduit ends up being insane, you got to go for Wild Hunt's Charge. If potency conduits end up being ridiculous, you got to go for Horn of Wild Hunt. And of course, when the conduits are available, I'll be making that guide and let you know exactly that. Because when you're making these decisions, they're quasi-permanent. You want to make sure you're making the right one. Moving down here, we've got Face Your Foes. When in front of your target, your spells and abilities decrease the damage they inflict on you by 2%. So again, just 2% damage reduction. Most of the time, the target attacking you, you're going to be facing them, unless it's a rogue or a feral druid. So it's pretty much just 2% damage reduction. Not a huge amount of value in PvE. It's okay in PvP. First Strike, damaging an enemy before they damage you increases your critical strike chance. Crit's not good in PvP. I don't think that crit is that insane here, unless when we get to the third option that it's obvious that this could be the most throughput. Hold the line. After 5 seconds standing still, you take 10% less physical damage until you move. So this could mean you get stunned, and then by the end of the stun, you've got the damage reduction, or you anticipate a stun, you start standing still to get that 10% damage reduction for when the stun occurs. To me, that seems like the best PvP pick, but also taking into consideration that's only physical damage. Whereas this 2% was all damage, and it's likely would be all damage from dungeon mobs as well if you're taking into consideration the whole game. So this is a very difficult to say. It's going to be, this pick would likely be decided by the conduits or be decided by what specs are the best. If for some reason Resto Druids are dying a lot, it's warriors and hunters and physical damage dealers, then Hold the Line ends up getting more value than Face Your Foes. But if you're PvEing, you could just get this crit overall. So this is a tough pick. Seems to me the safe one would be Face Your Foes. It's just good in all situations. But you may also want to consider the conduits when I get to them and they're available. The next tier is just for fun again. Your weapon doesn't take any durability, save some gold, or you get increased mount speed by 3%, and allies behind you within 40 yards gain this benefit, so a little bit of movement speed or some gold. On the final tier, now this one gets a lot more value with Balanced Druid, because you're a damage dealer, so your healing and damage to targets below 35% is increased by 3%. That part's somewhat negligible. It's just, yeah, you get 3% healing. Resto Druids typically are attrition healers, so the targets you're healing are usually lower on health and just hovering at that part, trying to recover. So this should get some value, but at the same time, 35% is quite low in PvP. There's a lot of execute abilities coming back to the game, like Touch of Death for Windwalker, which is just a flat-out I kill you button when you dip too low on health. So you might be running a pretty risky gamble here as Resto with this. But when an ally dies, this benefit is increased by 500%. So if you're healing your ally and they go down, you're going to get some damage too. I could see this getting some nice value in 2v2 maybe. So if you're a Resto Druid and you do a lot of 2v2, this might turn the tables. You could maybe reverse a game where your partner goes down and then you get aggressive and get a kill. This one's a bit more tricky to utilize overall. Korayn as a talent tree for Resto Druid, I would say across the board in the game. Although maybe in a raid you got multiple targets at 35%. Korayn seems to be the most difficult to make work in my mind. It's definitely between Nia, if you're looking for those drink plays, trying to get some extra slows and just some overall mastery healing, seems pretty straightforward that she's a good pick. And then if Pod Tender works for Dreamweaver, that Dreamweaver would also be a good selection, getting that insane slow, best slow in the game, 90%. So I hope that you enjoyed the video here for Restoration Druid and the Covenant Nightfae. Again, subscribe to the channel, please. I'm going to be releasing videos as frequently as I can. I'm doing my best to go through all the specializations, give you my thoughts, and then on my Twitch, I'll be live streaming the actual gameplay and the actual live testing of what I'm talking here to confirm that the theory is accurate. Before we move into Shadowlands, I'll be doing legendary reviews as well, so I'll be going over all the new legendaries that are coming in. Those are going to work in PvP, so you want to know which ones are good, and this is going to be a good resource for you overall, so please consider subscribing, and I will see you in the next video.